Hello everyone. Tonight we're going to start with the amazing life of a Viking Shieldmaiden, not a queen or a myth. She was the epitome of Norse grit and feminine strength, fierce, battle-trained, and feared by foes on both sides of the North Sea. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video before you settle in, but only if you truly like what I do here. Additionally, tell me in the comments what time it is for you and where you are tuning in from. Seeing who is joining us from around the globe is always exciting. Let's ease into tonight's voyage together by turning down the lights and possibly turning on a fan to provide a gentle background hum. You naturally come into the world in the dead of winter. The longhouse smells of smoke, damp fur, and boiling cabbage. The midwife is intoxicated, and the fire is hardly lit. Gripping a wooden spoon as though it were a weapon, which to be honest, it frequently is, your mother lies on a heap of wool blankets that haven't been cleaned since the previous harvest. You yell instead of crying. It makes the midwife wince. Looking at you, your father, who says he has witnessed 3 raids and 1 troll, murmurs, "She's going to be trouble." Like this is a diagnosis, the rest of the town nods. Your life is already a gamble because you're a girl. You'll either die young or get married off, or if you're lucky and sufficiently frightful, you'll avoid all of that and become a Shieldmaiden, a title that most girls only read about in sagas. A repurposed goat trough is your crib. You share it with a carved owl, a piece of wool, and maybe a spider named Hilda, who won't go. No lullabies, only the snoring of loud guys and the sharpening of an axe in the corner. A hound passes by and licks your forehead every few minutes. This is a baby monitor in Viking form. 2 brothers who already smell like battle, a grandmother who communicates with ghosts, and an aunt who has 3 previous marriages. All to men who suddenly passed away in training accidents make up your family. You are the only girl who didn't come screaming out of the 4 that were born this year. You came glowing. How loud you were and whose ancestor hasn't had a child named after them in a long time are the 2 factors that go into choosing your name. Brynhild or Freydis, which roughly translates to "May the gods have mercy on anyone who insults her," is what you wind up with. You make it through your first night, which is more than most people can claim. The milk is fresh, the lice show up on time, and the fire keeps you warm. The hamlet is already referring to you as the loud one before the end of the week. A wooden dagger is carved for you as a teething tool. Instead of chewing on it, you work on your grasp. At 2 years old, you are teething and quite mobile. A sheep bone is your first weapon, and the entire world is your battlefield. Childhood in Viking culture is harsh. No safety rails, pacifiers, or plush toys are present. Whatever didn't end up in the stew pot is what you get. A carved wooden horse with bite wounds from 3 cousins and 1 missing leg is your favorite toy. Additionally, you have a stick and a pig bladder ball that you can use as a wand, sword, and disciplinary tool on anything smaller than yourself. The mud outside the longhouse, which you share with future tragedy and livestock, is your playtime. The concept of childproofing does not exist. Everything is either tasty, combustible, or sharp, and occasionally all 3. You swallowed a fishhook once. When it emerged again, the village cheered. Games are cruel and easy. Keep the chicken ends from getting scratched. The person who can toss the rock the farthest gets bruised. Social friction results from raiding the neighbor's firewood pile when someone cries and an adult exclaims, "Thor's beard, not again." Your favorite game, Ambush Your Cousin, comes to an end. You quickly pick up social norms, such as sharing food only after licking it. Always give the chieftain's dog the first bite of comb. If you touch someone else's, it will still eat it. Using a portion of your hand, schooling, not precisely. What you observe is what you learn. You watch your mom repairing clothing and grinding grain. You witness your father argue about taxes paid in fish while cleaning guns. Your elder siblings are battling with sticks and attempting to outdo one another by hoisting goats. You also give that a try. It doesn't end well. You can skin a rabbit, build a fire, and tell when people are lying to you by the time you're 4 years old. You're good at sneaking in and taking honey cakes. You are frequently caught. It develops character. Some kids are submissive and silent. One of those is not you. You get pride in your little chest, blood on your tunic, and dirt in your hair. She has the appearance of a woman who will grow up to frighten men, your grandmother remarks, patting your head. You like the way it sounds, even though you don't comprehend yet. At the age of 5, you've discovered 2 significant things. Life is fire, the rest of it is chilly and noisy. Your education starts early amid the harsh, icy realities of village life rather than in a classroom. Forget reading circles and chalkboards. Don't fall in the fjord is your first lesson. The second is to avoid touching it if it's steaming. You fail at both. There is no such thing as a school. Rather, you receive your education using the traditional Norse curriculum. Repetition, observation, and being screamed at by weary grown-ups brandishing sharp implements. Calculation. It's like counting spoons and sheep. You receive a practical lesson in consequences if you lose either. Are you reading? Runes etched into stone are displayed to you, and you are informed that they signify death. You memorize it and nod. When half of the words mean hit, bleed, or run, vocabulary expands quickly. You learn from your mother how to grind grain without breaking any fingers. You learn how to wield a blade from your father without appearing to be crying. In theory, your aunt teaches you how to gut a man, and your uncle teaches you how to gut a fish. Baby talk is never used. Even when you don't comprehend half of what adults are saying, they nevertheless speak in regular voices. You pick things up quickly. Otherwise, you are socially and physically left behind. Yes, there are songs, but the most are about blood feuds or valiantly losing a battle. You hum them as you work on household tasks. The story of a warrior having his ribs torn out through his back is told in your lullaby. It's strangely calming. By the time you're 6 years old, you can tie a knot, sharpen a sword, and recognize when the goats are acting threatening. You also know how to toss a rock with tactical accuracy, smuggle additional berries, and lie with assurance. You're not growing up. Those who haven't smiled since the last solstice are forging you in the fire like a blade. Nevertheless, pride exists. Nobody applauds when you do something correctly. They simply nod, grunt, and let you try again with a little less oversight. In the contemporary sense, you are not a child. You're just a tiny adult with a little more snot and less obligations. Unannounced, inconvenient, and utterly indifferent to your feelings, puberty comes like a bad omen. One morning you wake up a little taller, a little odorous, and filled with an inexplicable anger. Your insults are more powerful, yet your voice remains the same. Your perspiration could knock out a wild boar at 20 paces, and your face decides to get more oily than a lamp. Greetings from Viking puberty. Every month you bleed now. No one talks to you or hands you a leaflet. Go ahead and do it, your mother says, passing you a piece of wool. You do, because she's already returned to skinning a rabbit, and you have no other option. Your chores aren't changing, but your body is. You continue to clean fish, haul water, cut wood, and wrestle goats who personally despise you. With back agony and an enigmatic want to stab things, you're just doing it now. Everyone claims that this is typical. Your training gets more intense. Wooden sticks are no longer used for sparring. You initially use dull, genuine blades. They don't want to replace you just yet, not because they don't want you to be harmed. You are urged to strike more forcefully, move more quickly, and never cry, unless it's from joy or blood loss. When you defeat the boys, you're advised not to boast and you're supposed to battle them as equals. In any case, you do. To the goats, quietly. The social situation is more peculiar. Some girls begin to flirt with boys while carefully plaiting their hair. During battle training, you braid your hair to keep it out of your eyes. You ask them if they want to spar when they show interest in you. Most retreat gradually. Fewer people attempt twice. You spend your evenings eating stew, cleaning weapons, and attempting to avoid thinking too much about the future. Silk tunics and weddings are not something you dream of. You imagine yourself standing shoulder to shoulder with warriors in a shield wall without anyone questioning your strength. Although you haven't yet earned your spot, you're almost there, and you no longer see a girl when you see your reflection in the blacksmith's shield, arms bruised, hair wild, eyes ferocious. A threat is visible to you. When you turn 12, you are regarded as nearly an adult in Viking times and are just old enough to use steel to wreck your own life. Your father gives you a gift on your birthday. It's cold, heavy, lengthy, and wrapped in cloth. With caution, you open it, anticipating a broom, or perhaps a loaf of dry bread. It's an axe instead. Leather-wrapped, iron-bladed, and sharp enough to cut through logs, bones, or pride. You quickly name it. Not because you're sentimental, but because treating it like a buddy seems to help you feel less afraid of it. You pick anything suitably frightful, such as mittens or wolf-biter. You step outside to give it a try. Your initial strike almost knocks down the barrier but misses the target entirely. You strike your own foot with your second swing. You don't weep. You simply sit there bleeding silently, thinking if this is a horrible idea with a metal edge, or if it's a rite of passage. That's how you learn, your uncle says, bandaging your toe. Then he gives you a pig's ear while laughing. You politely decline. Trial and error will be the norm during the next few weeks. Mostly mistakes, logs, hay dummies, and sometimes the training post, which now tilts a little from all the off-center hits, are your practicing grounds. Your form gets better. Your self-assurance increases. Your foot continues to hurt. You learn how to sharpen the blade, oil the handle, and swing without twitching your back like an elderly drunk attempting to dance. After your hands blister, you continue to practice until the blisters become calluses. You can train alone at times. There are occasions when your cousin, who is 2 years older, insists on whirling in circles prior to each blow, as if he were performing for unobserved gods. One day you counterattack, block a strike, and hit your opponent's ribs cleanly. They cough something about seeing stars and drop their weapon. You don't boast. A lot. You place your axe next to your bed that night, nor for show, nor for custom, but simply in case you are mistaken for something other than an issue by someone breaking in. You're learning more than just how to fight. You're discovering that it's what you were made for. Like most poor ideas, it begins with someone saying something. When a taller, more arrogant boy who has just won a sparring battle looks at you and asks, "Are you sure you want to fight?" You're at training, holding your axe, and going about your business. The last thing you want is to break a nail. You don't answer. Not in words. Rather, you enter the ring, give the instructor a nod, and prepare. The boy smiles. One of his encouraging friends whispers something like, "Go easy on her," and he's already half-turned toward them. You don't treat him lightly. Your initial strike has been prevented. His shoulder is grazed by your second. With a sound akin to a dying goose, your third strikes him squarely in the chest, taking the wind out of him. He bounces back fast, swings widely, and misses. As if you've been dreaming about this moment all your life, you duck, sweep his legs, and drag him down into the muck. He tries to get up. Your foot lands on his chest. Quiet. The boy's cheering stops. He clears his throat, the instructor says, The goats observing from the field's border appear rather impressed. You leave without saying a word, throwing your braid back like a battle flag. After coughing and muttering something that could have been "good match," the lad hobbles off to tend to his damaged pride and other injuries. One of the elders later yanks you away. You expect to be reprimanded. Rather, they mutter, "Good footwork." Your mother nods at you. After raising one eyebrow, your father offers you more dried fish for supper. It is regarded as a standing ovation in Viking culture. For a week, the boy doesn't look at you. At last, he does so with the cautious deference one might show a bear that one has once unintentionally poked with a stick. That day, you discover something significant. To be heard, you don't need to speak louder. To be liked, you don't need to grin. And when someone else gets caught in the mud because of your underestimating, you most certainly don't have to apologize. You will never forget the smell of victory, which is a combination of perspiration, grime, and a little too much stew. No prophecy, no ritual, no luminous runes, and no spectacular lightning bolts dividing the sky are present. She's ready with just a busted lip, a cracked shield, and an elderly warrior's grunt. You fought, perspired, and earned every bruise as a badge of honor during the past few years. You start your mornings with drills. You wake up in the middle of the night with muscles you didn't know existed. Injuries can now be recognized based only on their pain. Sprain, a dull throb, a bruise, a sharp sting, ego, still bruised from losing to your grandmother in a wrestling match last week. Your braid is now longer for use rather than fashion. To prevent it from getting tangled in your helmet or snatched by someone with bad judgment, you tie it back before combat. In some cases, girls weave in beads. It's not your teeth and leather that you weave in, most likely. Training has changed. Your ability to hold your head while someone tries to remove it is more important than your ability to wield an axe. You now spar with males. You don't expect anyone to be kind to you, and nobody is. You now know that the cost of hesitation is greater than the suffering. You lose respect for it. Your dominant arm is weaker than your shield arm. Your fingers are always covered in scabs or leather. Even though you don't always win, you never give up. They trust you because of that. Then your shield splits one day while you're sparring, someone twice your size giving you a clean hit. Splinters fly as it cracks down the middle. You throw it away and continue, bloodied, barehanded, and just sufficiently enraged to add intrigue. The match is lost by you, but what you did is never forgotten. On that day, the elders begin to use your name in a different way. As a fighter to be relied upon, not as a child to be corrected. Nobody mentions that you are now a Shieldmaiden. However, when you take your place in the shield wall, they no longer cast sidelong glances. The blood, the bruises, the braid, all of it was earned. You are more than just a Shieldmaiden now. People now monitor you to see what you'll do when things go wrong. Within the first hour of boarding a long ship, you have a profound remorse for every decision that led you here. The wind is nasty, the deck is slippery, and the rowing bench is essentially a wooden pane in the back. You were surrounded by soldiers who smell like dried perspiration, aged leather, and hope that died 3 days ago. Personal space is non-existent. Your knee touches someone's axe when you move a little. Another person sneezes into your hair as you move. Overhead, a seagull shouts, perhaps making fun of your life decisions. Rowing isn't a glamorous sport. Under the pretext of transportation, it is a full-body punishment. You get blisters on your hands by mid-morning. Your blisters have blisters by midday. It feels like someone used a cheese scraper to shred your palms. This indicates that you're doing things correctly, you're told. No relief is available, just rowing. Your arms hurt. You have numb legs. Additionally, your seat is soggy that it makes you wonder about your existence. You are getting closer to glory with each stroke. Probably tendinitis as well. Onboard meals are dreary. It tastes like the inside of a helmet, dried fish. You could use hard bread as a weapon. And if you're generous, water is still technically water. You chew slowly while thinking about rebelling. You use your axe as a pillow and your shield as a blanket while you sleep at night, cuddled up against the ship's side, the waves, the crew's slumber, and the persistent sensation that someone who despises enjoyment arranged the entire trip rock you gently. But there's more to it than the suffering, the cold, and the persistent moisture, the excitement of the ocean, the team's spirit among the workers, the silent satisfaction that you do belong here. You merited your position. There's no tag-along in you. As a mascot, you are not. You're a fighter. Warriors also row. Your hands hurt, your shoulders burn, and your pulse thuds with anticipation as the coastline emerges in the distance, a black, unknown line on the horizon. You're completely prepared, hungry, tired, and a little seasick. The boat is a crucible, not merely a means of transportation. Additionally, you will be forged upon landing. The coastline seemed to be a secret that nobody wanted to divulge. A peaceful village, roofing made of thatch, smoke gently floating from chimneys, chickens, most likely a baker. A little optimistic goat, perhaps. It will be destroyed by you. Your stomach lowers as your longship lands, not because you feel bad, but rather because of a genuine physical panic. It's your first raid, actual steel, actual adversaries. If you tumble in the mud and stab yourself before anyone else has a chance, there will be serious repercussions. You get off the ship. The softness of the beach is a drawback. Before you even make it to the village, you almost twist your ankle. Around you, loud, primal, and largely spontaneous battle cries reverberate. Your cough sounds like a goat's. Everything is all right. You're brand new. You make a charge. Your first foe isn't a fighter, it's a chicken. It flails as if it has something to prove as it charges at you. You barely dodge and swing at a man with a pitchfork in his hand. Dropping it, he flees. After a little pursuit, you realize you should be stealing. You enter a storage house and discover cheese. Lots of cheese. You pick some up. I feel like I've won. Chaos, yelling, and fire outside. A bucket causes someone to trip. For no apparent reason, someone else begins to sing. Beside you, a warrior shouts, "To Odin!" and tumbles down a well. You start to realize why Viking attacks are so perplexing and frightening. The resistance eventually wanes. The village has been looted and destroyed, which is a polite way of stating that it is pacified. What's useful is gathered by your crew. A really good stool, animals, silver, and tools. With half a wheel of cheese, a stolen spoon, and a damaged shin, you hobble back to the boat. It isn't what you had anticipated. No glory in slow motion, no grandiose speech. All of it was noise, adrenaline, and the dim knowledge that you might have yelled for the full 20 minutes. However, you are still alive. You didn't back down. Your firearm was not dropped. You sense it, even if your ears are still ringing and your tunic smells like goat panic. Around the fire, the elder warriors discuss it in quiet tones. That dash, that assurance, that authority. Your first raid wasn't the only one you survived. You took part, and you'll be better the next time. The conflict is over. Behind you, the community is smoking, being raided, and most likely not understanding what has just transpired. The smell of someone grilling fear over a fire built of damp regret fills your awe as you slump back on the longship. You have a tattered tunic. You have dirty boots. You were unaware of the cut on your shoulder until someone else brought it out to you. They smile and add, "That'll scar nicely," as though it were sound medical advice. Your thighs hurt, your hands are blistered, and a certain chicken feather is still lodged in your braid. You can't tell if it's from lunch or a fight, maybe both. It's quieter in the rowback. Nobody is yelling, simply chewing, moaning, and the sarcastic recounting of who stumbled over what every now and then. Someone claims that they repelled 5 armed locals on their own. You saw him sob as he dropped his blade into a puddle. Nobody corrects him. This is what he needs. Food is distributed, hard bread, dried fish, and above all, a flask of ale. It's warm, it's bitter. It tastes like mold and victory. Regardless, you drink. You thought victory would sound louder. In reality, though, it feels like bruises and a profound, agonizing gratification that lies between your spine and your ribs. You took action. You made it across the ocean, held the line, and returned with a tail and some cheese. You're back at camp by dusk. The fire is crackling. The flesh sizzles. Someone is snoring right into their helmet while already asleep. Like you're waiting for the gods to speak, you sit cross-legged with your fellow fighters and gaze into the flames. Gods don't talk. However, someone gives you a cooked turnip, which is nearly identical. The low, tired chuckle that comes from people who have endured something foolish together is now audible. You also chuckle. It was humorous, but only because it actually happened. You were present as well. You also survived. You know this is the first of many raids and the first of many hurts as you snuggle up for the night with your shield and your still dented helmet. But you sleep tonight. You deserved it. The winter brings an end to the riding season, and with it, your fleeting moment of fame. You go home anticipating relaxation and possibly even recognition. Winter is what you get. Viking winter, full-fledged, nose-biting and morale-destroying. The fjord turns icy. Like a retiring dragon, the longship is dragged inland and turned upside down. Knowing full well that your off-season is nothing more than survival on hard mode, you pack away your armor. The tasks are doubled. The light of day disappears. Then comes your motivation. Your fingers become numb from cutting firewood. From a chilly stream that looks back at you as if it wants you dead, you drag frozen buckets of water. Even though they despise you spiritually, the goats now depend on you for hay and warmth. Although you dislike them, you admire their obstinacy. At 3 in the morning, they shout in return. The food situation quickly gets worse. Fresh meat fades into the past. You now eat fish pickled in what may possibly be cleaning vinegar, dried fish, and smoked fish. There's turnip mash for variation. It's not helpful. Wrapped in all your layers, you eat in silence. You have the scent of regret, moist fur, and wool. It has been weeks since your hair was completely dry. Your toes are unfamiliar to you. Dust is collected by your shield. In any case, you polish it mostly to recall what happiness looked like. Your family is always there. Too often. Arguments about who should move the firewood and why the stew smells like socks abound in the smoky, packed longhouse. Even if your fingers freeze to the sword hilt, you practice outside in the snow merely to escape. However, something shifts. You gain strength. Both physically and emotionally, you become colder. You come to value quiet. The smell of pickled things fades from your mind. You persevere. The snow starts to melt one morning. The first birdsong you've heard in months is a high-pitched sound that sounds like a migraine and hope. To get to the fjord, you walk. They're breaking the ice. The arrival of spring is imminent. It's going to be riding season again, and you'll be prepared when it does. Underfed, angry, and desperate to do something. Winter made an effort. It lost. You make it through the winter. Only a little. Your prize? Proposals of marriage, they start off rather innocently. Arriving with a package of dried fish and a hopeful smile is the son of a local farmer. You would make a strong wife, he says. In response, you inquire about his axe-swinging skills. I don't do weapons, he says. You claim that you don't like males who aren't able to wield a knife. He walks away. Fast. The next one makes a greater effort. He has a gift for you, antler carved into a comb. You use it to scratch your hound behind the ears after graciously accepting it. He never comes back. It quickly turns into a trend. In an attempt to tame the village's most eligible shield maiden, young men with trinkets and anxious energy arrive. You don't want to be tamed, which is the issue. Raids, dueling, and perhaps the occasional feast where goats are not discussed are what you want. According to your aunt, you ought to think about getting married. When your axe rusts, you'll settle down, you assure her. She murmurs that she will die by herself. You respond, dying gloriously, which, to be honest, sounds better. You are challenged to a duel by one particularly audacious suitor. It's tradition, he says. You concur. In addition to learning a useful lesson about undervaluing women who train in the snow for enjoyment, he sustains a bruise that resembles your shield. The offers eventually come to an end. Word gets out. You have no interest. Not in the role of a wife, not when preparing stew each night, and most certainly not when squabbling over who gets the nice fur blanket. You simultaneously want less and more. More combat, reduce the small conversation, more splendor. Goats are reduced. You're not against love, to be clear. There's no one you've ever seen who makes your heart race like a battle drum. You can continue honing your axe in peace until you do. You're too haughty, some of the village girls whisper. A few of the boys in the community mutter that they are afraid. Both are right. Rather than weaving, you spend your evenings on the training field. You don't organize a wedding, you polish your sword, and you keep your axe at your side while you sleep. Not because you're lonely, however, it is the soul buddy that never responds. You've been in combat before, raids, battles, little tribal disputes involving insults and goats. However, it's war. There is a sort of silence before dawn, as if the earth is holding its breath. The adversary is not a far-off village of terrified farmers. They are fighters, armed, protected, are already keeping your name in mind as they polish their blades. You don't receive a powerful speech. All you can hear is your chieftain saying, "Don't die, stupid," and leaving to tie his boots. You give a nod. That seems about correct. People you have fought alongside and occasionally insulted around the cook fire are standing shoulder to shoulder with you in the shield wall. Today, your shield feels heavier. Your breathing also does. There's a nearby throw-up. Another person sings. Then it starts. The initial conflict is chaotic. The shields slam. Swords roar. A person passes away. More than one person, most likely. You obstruct, swing, duck, stab. Do it again. It's not a plan. It's survival at a panicked pace. Your shield breaks. You take up your axe instead. Your axe breaks. A man who no longer needs a spear drops it for you to take up. Time eludes you. You lose track of the language you're yelling in. All you know is that your arms keep moving and your feet hurt. You tumble at some point. Not in a big way. A simple stumble. A corpse that resembles a person you knew is lying next to you in the mud. All you can hear is the distant thunder of battle and the thudding of your heart. There is a shadow. You roll. A blade barely notices you. You pick up a rock. You make advantage of it. It functions. In some way, the field is quiet once more after it's really finished. However, Earth is no longer holding its breath. The dead are the ones who will never breathe again. Covered in blood that isn't really yours, you sit there attempting to recall how to experience emotions like pride, fear, and even hunger. When a bird lands close by, it instantly regrets it. You made it through. You ought not to have. However, you did. Additionally, you will shrug and respond, "Didn't have anything better to do," when someone asks how, which is accurate. Not the entire story, though. Things alter after the fight. You remain who you are. The same boots, the same axe, the same enigmatic stew stain that won't go away from your cloak. However, people's perceptions of you have changed, not like a combatant exactly, similar to a narrative. You begin to be referred to as the one who wouldn't die. Another refers to you as Goat Hammer, which is less complimentary, but develops popularity due to one tragic event involving a nearby goat and an adversary on the run. You're not interested in correcting them. Let them speak. The truth is less fascinating and more messy. People are moving about the village now, not far away, set aside as if they're unsure if you'll challenge them or seek for assistance. You give a courteous nod. They nervously nod in return. When you're not looking, kids challenge one another to poke your shield while whispering your name. They never make it. At one point, you caught a boy in the act of sneaking and gave him your axe. He stopped. You remained silent. He gave it back and ran away. Since then, you haven't seen him. Clever child. Before a raid, warriors now solicit your views because you've been there, done that, and returned with more wounds than excuses, not just out of courtesy. You've changed from being a loud, violent girl. You've served in the military, someone who solves problems, a terrific arm swing in a cautionary story. Your name, or something similar, is known to strangers. You are referred to as Mistress of Blades by a visiting merchant who bows too deeply. You ask him if he brought nicer cheese this time and correct him by spitting into a pail. He nods so rapidly that he nearly passes out. You hear your own story told back to you at night, by the fire. A little off, a lot of drama, and new details like a berserker kiss, a luminous raven, and thunder. You remain silent. That's how it's funny. You didn't request notoriety. You didn't smile for it for sure. But you carry it around like a shield now that it's here. Always ready, well worn, and a little dented. You used to question whether you would be taken seriously. You now question if they will be able to speak for a while without trembling. You are no longer the youngest. A new generation of wide-eyed females is chatting too loudly about their plans for combat, holding their axes too loosely, and tying their braids too tightly. You recognize yourself in them, albeit with greater optimism and less bruises. They keep a careful eye on you, not like a hero, more akin to a hurricane that might break out at any time. That's something you deserve. In the mornings, your joints hurt. When it's cold, your sword wrist snaps. Every time it's going to snow, a scar across your ribs itch. You no longer recover as quickly as you once did. The pain stays like an old drinking companion who is unsure of when to go once you do. You're not softer, though. In the appropriate places, you're simply harder. You work out more to stay sharp and less to prove something. You sleep lighter and eat more slowly. Don't talk until you have something worthwhile to say. Thus, your voice has not yet reached half of the longhouse. You respond, "Don't die," when younger shield maidens ask how to win their first battle. You tell them to break their nose and then help them up when they ask how to get someone to appreciate them. And you're honest when they ask when it's no longer scary. It doesn't. You simply become more adept at acting, though not as frequently. You still raid. People now look to see if you're coming when you do. They breathe more easily if you are. They double-check their armor if you're not. Your axe is weathered, with a new leather grip and a keen but notched blade. More people see it than most soldiers. All of your suitors have outlived it. You've considered hanging it. However, you recall when someone says something foolish or when a danger is approaching. You're not finished yet. You had no desire to become famous. All you wanted to do was fight, to live, to make a name for yourself in a world that didn't believe you needed one. And you did somehow, through fire, blood, and your unwavering will to keep going. Not all you are is a shield maiden. You are a cautionary tale. And you'll smile the next time someone asks if you still fight. Only a bit. And only speak when required. And occasionally, simply for enjoyment. The Greeks thought that napping was the greatest method to recover even before there were hospitals or white coats. Within a temple, Lazy medicine was not what this was. The process was known as incubation. It was also holy. In ancient Greece, you didn't schedule a doctor if you were ill. You prepared your belongings and travelled to the sanctuary of Asclepius, the god of healing, which was frequently at Epidaurus, where the aroma of sacrifice and laurel mingled with marble colonnades. Upon arrival, you would bathe in sacred water, perform purification rites, present a little sacrifice, typically a rooster, and get ready for sleep in the abaton, a silent, dark room where patients lay down on mats, occasionally surrounded by slithering snakes. Snakes, indeed. They represented regeneration and rejuvenation and were considered sacred by Asclepius. The concept was straightforward, yet ethereal. God will visit you in a dream if you fall asleep in his presence. These were not merely symbolic dreams of the gods. They were prescription drugs. Asclepius may touch your injured leg or give you a medicinal herb. A temple priest would receive your vision in the morning, interpret it like a spiritual chemist, and give you advice on what to do. It was not a passive procedure. The body and mind were prepared for healing by the temple journey, the purification, and the prayer. According to some academics, it was an early type of psychosomatic treatment. Some refer to it as a theatrical placebo. Whatever it was, though, it was thought to work, and it frequently did. Sometimes patients are cured and go home. Others were motivated to leave. However, nearly every one of them went home with a tale. And these stories written in stone were proudly displayed in the temples. Testimonies of miraculous interventions healed limbs and sight restored. Certainly not clinical experiments, but powerful testimonies in marble. The ceremony made it difficult to distinguish between diagnosis and dream, between religion and medicine. Aligning with divine equilibrium was more important than combating symptoms. The body wasn't the only thing that healed. It was a dialogue with the universe, and the universe responded if you were lucky. Sometime about midnight, a snake curled at your feet, whispered, and took the form of a god. Let's now travel east to ancient Mesopotamia and depart from the tranquil sleep chambers of Greece. Healing in this place was not so much a slumber as an exorcism. Illness was not merely biological in the region between the Tigris and Euphrates, it was also individualized. It was believed that evil spirits, whether they be spiteful ghosts, envious neighbors, or angry gods, were responsible for sickness. And the remedy? Place a basin over the devil. Known as Babylonian demon bowls, or so-called incantation bowls, these were the Mesopotamian counterpart of spiritual bug zappers. They were straightforward clay items that were concealed beneath house thresholds and positioned upside down. However, their function was everything but ornamental. Protective spells and holy names were engraved on each bowl, spiraling inward in Aramaic or other regional languages, invoking angels, saints, and cosmic powers to bind whatever evil force could be hiding. The writing was complex, purposeful, and little insane. Like an old-fashioned spiritual Tupperware, the devil was supposed to remain imprisoned in the bowl indefinitely, rather than simply departing the body. Even poorly painted representations of the offending spirit, shackled and looking somewhat uneasy, were included on some bowls. Like magical mugshots, the image was intended to degrade the demon. Others went beyond, mentioning competing sorcerers, family names, and even domestic grievances. It was about defense as much as it was about healing. You needed spiritual insurance in a world full with whispered spells, evil looks, and curses. Usually these bowls were hidden in the corners of houses, beneath thresholds, or beneath doorways. Why was it there? Because demons are thought to lurk at the outskirts, ready to infiltrate undetected, much like nosy neighbors. By acting as imperceptible bouncers, the bowls kept the family together and the negative energy out. The deeper rationale is oddly sympathetic, even though modern medicine might laugh. Through these rituals, invisible threats were externalized. and fear was given a name, a shape, and a container. They also helped people feel in control of a chaotic world. Perhaps look under your doormat the next time you have a strange feeling that you are unable to fully describe. Perhaps a dusty bowl still exists quietly, doing its purpose, containing the shadows with little more than clay, ink, and the optimism of ancient Mesopotamia. The ancient Egyptians resorted to more pleasurable substances like plants, perfumes, and potions, while the Mesopotamians were occupied with capturing devils in ceramics. They believed that healing was about harmony, balance, and divine smell, in addition to physical restoration. The blue lotus, a flower with hypnotic properties and spiritual significance, was at the center of this aromatic medical practice. The blue lotus was actually intoxicating in addition to being gorgeous. It was used to relieve pain, bereavement, or spiritual anguish, and to provide mild euphoria when soaked in wine or infused into salves. Lotus blossoms are depicted in ancient paintings as being held by feast attendees, offered by priests in temples, and even interred with mummies. It was believed that the flower opened the mind to sacred visions and healing dreams by bridging the gap between the living and the divine. However, the Egyptian medical chest was not just equipped with lotuses, not at all. The empirical and the esoteric were brilliantly combined in Egyptian medicine. In documents such as the Ebers Papyrus, a 20-meter scroll containing everything from honey-based wound treatments to crocodile dung suppositories, yes, really, they listed more than 800 medicines. Some of these remedies, particularly those that used myrrh, garlic, and frankincense, all of which are now recognized for their antibacterial qualities, were remarkably successful. Others were not so much scientists as they were spiritual. Placing a cooked mouse on the affected area was a popular toothache treatment. Chanting spells to ward off disease as though it were a disobedient servant was another. Doctors frequently served as priests, and the distinction between prayer and medication was blurred. The temples themselves functioned as medical facilities. Poultices, incantations, and offerings to gods such as Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plagues, were used to treat the ill. Fantastic if you were able to heal. Maybe the gods were trying to test your resolve if you didn't. But don't be misled. The approach taken by the Egyptians was not utterly magical. They drained abscesses, set bones, and carried out surgical procedures. They were even able to diagnose illnesses by analyzing urine and understanding the pulse. Indeed, later, Greek physicians such as Hippocrates and Galen made extensive use of Egyptian techniques. However, the rites persisted since healing was more than just physical in Egypt. It was a religious act, a means of bringing the eternal and the flesh into harmony. Occasionally, a flower, a spell, and a small amount of linen-wrapped faith were all that was required. As the Egyptians wrapped the ill in fragrant oils, healing took on a new urgency in Siberia and the indigenous Americas, where the goal was to recover the soul rather than cure the body. Illness was more than a symptom here. It was an indication that a piece of your soul had been lost, stolen, scared, or misplaced. And the shaman was the only one who could go retrieve it. Shamans were not medical professionals in the traditional sense. They were a combination of a priest, a healer, a cosmic travel agent, and intermediates. They might drum, chant, fast, and have hallucinations for hours or even days as part of their recovery rites. Why? In order to retrieve the missing piece of a patient's soul, they would enter an altered state of consciousness and travel into the spirit world, where they would fight evil forces, bargain with nature spirits, or negotiate with ancestors. These were not travels of metaphor. They were very real to the community and the shaman. Among the tools of the profession were animal masks or cloaks that symbolized the spirit guides, drums that were thought to be the earth's heartbeat, and sometimes hallucinogenic drugs that opened the inner vision. Ayahuasca, a potent concoction that causes visions, purging, and what one may politely refer to as revelatory chaos was a common weapon among Amazonian shamans. Breaking taboos, sadness, or tragedy can all result in soul loss. Chronic weariness, depression, or misfortune were among the symptoms, which are now referred to as psychological or psychosomatic distress. In contrast to therapy sessions, a healing ritual could entail dancing around a fire, chanting your name into the wilderness, or having your healer sing the spirit back into your chest. In certain customs, the shaman might physically enact the conflict by trembling, enacting a fight, or symbolically removing the illness by drawing invisible threads from the body. In others, they would rub pressure points, waft sacred smoke over you, or speak prayers into a child's sleeping ear. Sterile distance did not exist. The healing process was mythic, emotional, and communal. It had to do with memory, storytelling, and re-establishing the intangible connections that bind an individual to their surroundings. Because in these cultures, you get a crack in your soul rather than just a cold. And if you're lucky, someone with the courage to bring your spirit home will venture into the dark. The ancient Indian sages looked inward as shamans searched the spirit world for missing souls. They mapped the rhythms of life into Ayurveda, which is more systematic, structured, and equally mystical, meaning being aware of life. This treatment approach focused more on preserving balance between the body, mind, and universe than it did on combating illness. It wasn't just lunch if you weren't feeling well. There was an imbalance in the cosmos. Ayurvedic doctrine states that each individual is composed of 3 doshas: space, air, and vata, water, fire, and pitta, earth, water, and kapha. In addition to determining your health, your particular mix also dictated your personality, temperament, and preferred breakfast. Eliminating symptoms was not the role of a healer. The goal was to restore your doshas by the use of herbs, food, massage, meditation, and, if necessary, a full oil bath. Oil indeed. Oil is adored in Ayurvedic treatment. Shirodhara, a technique used to expand the third eye and soothe the nervous system, involves drizzling warmed sesame or medicinal ghee across the forehead. Additional treatments include herbal smoking, detoxifying enemas, full-body oil massages, and even the cruel yet purifying practice of vamana, or forced vomiting. However, this was more than a collection of folk remedies. At least as far back as the 1st millennium BCE, Ayurvedic books such as the Karaka Samhita described intricate anatomical theories, surgical methods, and philosophical underpinnings. As skilled observers, ancient Ayurvedic practitioners used the patient's pulse, tongue, eyes, and even speech to diagnose illness. The spiritual side, however, was never far behind. In addition to being a bodily state, health was also seen as a moral one. Just like sour yogurt, greed, rage, or excessive desire could upset the doshas. Pranayama, breath control, chanting, and meditation. These were not merely religious rituals. They served as daily medication. Then there were the herbs, of course. Neem for detoxification, ashwagandha for energy, and turmeric for inflammation. Every plant served more than one purpose. It was lively, had personality, and had a backstory that was frequently connected to saints, gods, or cosmic occurrences. To put it briefly, Ayurveda did not consider illness to be a chance occurrence. It interpreted it as an inward whisper, a sign that something had slipped out of equilibrium. The war on sickness was not the solution. It was harmony, realignment, and a gentle reminder of life's beautiful cadence. Better still, use heated oil, a lot of it. Ancient China created its own complex system based on a similar idea of harmony, the flow of energy, or qi, pronounced chi, while India concentrated on balancing the doshas. According to TCM, illness was more than just the existence of a disease. The vital force was obstructed or misdirected. Imagine qi as an unseen river coursing through your body. Things go wrong when it dries up, floods, or stagnates. It restores health when it flows freely. The two governing concepts of this worldview were yin and yang, or the complementary powers of hot and cold, light and dark, passive and active. A competent healer does more than simply point out the problem. What is the overpowering factor? They asked. Which one is absent? Do you have too much fire? Insufficient water? Does your spleen harbor resentment? Your tongue was examined, your voice was heard, and your pulse was taken by practitioners. Not just once, but multiple times, each representing a distinct organ. Your liver may be upset. It is possible that your kidney is afraid. The diagnosis was nonetheless forceful, even though it frequently sounded more poetic than pathological. Acupuncture was frequently used for treatment. Hair-thin needles are inserted along meridians to promote natural flow and clear obstructions in energy pathways. Although the idea of needles may not seem soothing, many people found the experience to be oddly soothing, even euphoric at times. However, TCM was not a one-trick pony. Additionally, it used qigong, energy movement exercises, cupping, moxibustion, burning herbs close to the skin, herbal medicine, and careful meal planning. Licorice root, ginseng, and ginger are all carefully prescribed. The Huangdi Neijing, also known as the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon, is a medicinal philosophical debate that was composed circa 200 BCE and is considered to be one of the most sacred writings in this tradition. In it, the emperor and his doctor talk on the nature of sickness, as well as the cycles of emotions, seasons, and even politics. After all, the body was a small representation of the cosmos. A person was more than just a bag of organs in Chinese medicine. You were a component of the cosmic order, a living ecosystem. Bad dumplings weren't the only cause of a stomachache. Unresolved grief could be the cause. Physical healing was never the only kind. It was primal, sentimental, and moral. Additionally, the objective was to restore harmony rather than struggle when the elements went out of tune, much like when you tune an instrument or uncork a stream with needles and maybe a little burning mugwort. Healing has long been a communal practice across Africa's diverse and expansive landscapes, combining medicine, custom, and ancestry. Traditional African healing incorporates the family, the ancestors, the village, and the spirits, in contrast to Western models that isolate the patient in a clinic. Disease is not only a personal problem in many cultures, it is a societal upheaval and a cosmic imbalance that needs to be addressed holistically, ideally with smoke, drums, and a very worried chicken. Consider the Sangomas of southern Africa, who act as a link between the living and the dead by practicing psychic healing and divination. A Sangoma physically reads bones in addition to diagnosing ailments. The story is revealed by the placement of a handful of bones, shells, and trinkets that are placed on a mat. The ancestors communicate through the scatter, which is a type of spiritual radiology. The healing process starts as soon as the diagnosis is made, regardless of whether it was caused by emotional trauma, ancestral disapproval, or a curse. Initiation dances, plant-based medicines, and animal sacrifice are examples of rituals. A vital part is played by music. Movement, singing, and drumming are tools to enter trance states, welcome spirit guides, and change energy. They are not forms of entertainment. The objective? To repair the soul and its invisible connections to other people in addition to the body. Plants are also essential. In order to treat diseases, fever, infertility, or pain, traditional healers, sometimes referred to as herbalists or inyanga, have extensive knowledge of the indigenous flora, roots, barks, and leaves. During rituals, some herbs are burned, rubbed across the skin, or boiled into beverages. Others are ingested in intricate concoctions. This is not simple foraging. Rather, it is a highly developed pharmacology that has been handed down over the ages and is frequently safeguarded by spiritual initiation and secrecy. In addition, breaking social standards or taboos, disrespecting elders, disparaging a spirit, or crossing the incorrect grave can all result in illness. Therefore, healing is moral as well as medical. You might have to repent, confess, or go through purification. Indeed, this could include a very unpleasant family gathering, sacred ash, or chicken blood. The underlying concept is obvious. You are a member of a living network that is ecological, spiritual, and ancestral rather than an isolated individual. The healer's role is to listen, interpret, and repair the web using herbs, chants, and the knowledge of the ancestors who are watching from the firelight. When something goes wrong in you, it reverberates across the web. Many Native American cultures view healing as a process of cleansing the individual rather than repairing a physical ailment. An imbalance between the ego, the community, the spirit world, and environment is thought to be the cause of illness, whether it be physical or emotional. Therefore, the sweat lodge, a ritual of heat, prayer, and spiritual rebirth, is one of the most powerful healing practices in many indigenous societies. The lodge itself is a simple, dome-shaped building composed of willow branches covered with skins or blankets. It is quite hot and dark inside. A central pit is filled with heated stones called grandfathers, and steam is produced by pouring water flavored with holy herbs over them. Under the direction of a roadman or spiritual leader, participants sit in a circle, frequently naked or very lightly dressed, as the air grows heavy with heat and memories. This isn't a sauna, it's a womb. The lodge is a metaphor for the belly of the earth, a place of rebirth where one can release emotional loads, pain, and pollutants. Prayers are said and songs are performed, sometimes in ancient languages that are almost extinct. Typically, the process is carried out in rounds, each with a distinct subject and increasing intensity. Calling on ancestors, letting go, forgiving, or expressing gratitude. Sweating out illness isn't the only goal. It is to pay attention to the spirits, to other people, and to yourself, too. People frequently claim visions, emotional breakthroughs, or profound, unexpected tranquility when they are in the dark and free from outside distractions. It isn't always enjoyable. The agony can be severe and the heat unbearable. However, that's a component of the medication. Smudging, burning sacred herbs like sage, sweetgrass, or cedar to purify a person or area, and healing songs which are transmitted orally and are regarded as living medicine are further therapeutic practices. Some countries practice sand painting, in which spiritual forces are realigned through healing rites using vibrant designs created from crushed stone. But connection lies at the core of it all, to the earth, to the forefathers, to the natural world. Healing doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is carried out in relation. The person is restored to balance with the world through ritual. And the objective is always the same, whether it is accomplished by song, steam, or fire. To regain your equilibrium, to recollect your identity, and to once more walk on the hallowed ground with courage. One thing is evident after visiting sweat lodges beneath the stars and Greek dream temples. The body was never the only focus of ancient healing. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, and socially, it was a complete spectrum experience. Although the instruments differed, lotus salves, devil bowls, needles, and drums, the goal remained fairly constant. Bring the balance back. Throughout the ancient world, health was characterized by harmony rather than the absence of illness. Balance between the soul and the body, between nature and people, between the visible and invisible worlds. Healing rituals were effective because they gave the sick agency and meaning to their suffering, whether through the cosmic pulse of ki, the rhythm of drumming feet in the dust, or the calming trance of temple incubation. They also acknowledge something that contemporary medicine frequently overlooks. Humans are creatures of meaning. We want to know what's causing our agony. We want to think that we can do something about it. Both an explanation, whether it was spirits, an imbalance, or ancestral wrath, and a way forward were provided by ancient healing, which was frequently as communal as it was therapeutic. Even when these ceremonies had little medicinal value, they were nonetheless potent. A bowl of demons from Mesopotamia might have soothed the mind, but it might not have eradicated bacteria. Though it might not have repaired bones, a shaman's soul retrieval could alleviate trauma in ways that words could not. The ceremony, the symbolism, and the storytelling had real therapeutic effect, even in areas where the science was lacking. This is where the twist lies. A lot of these old insights are resurfacing. Mind-body methods are increasingly widely used in modern medicine, visualization, meditation, and even treatments based on plants. Shamanic trips are echoed by psychedelic-assisted therapy. Music, fragrance, and culturally appropriate customs are all incorporated into hospital treatment. After decades of scientific domination, it seems as though we are recalling an innate knowledge that our forefathers possessed. Chemistry isn't the only factor in healing. Connection is key. What can we learn from old healing practices then? It's about ourselves, not just about chants and plants. That humans are ecosystems to be nourished, not machines to be fixed. That occasionally the aroma of sacred smoke, a rhythmic drumbeat, or a spoken prayer can get where a scalpel cannot. For at its core, healing is more than just a medical procedure. It's a person, and the ancients knew that better than most despite their messiness and mysticism. Shells existed before crowns, amulets, or gemstone-encrusted rings. Small, punctured mollusk shells that are strung together and worn for purposes other than aesthetics. In locations like Blombos Cave in South Africa, where archaeologists discovered shell beads that are over 75,000 years old, some of the earliest jewelry in human history can be found. These embellishments weren't arbitrary. They had been organized, smoothed, and punctured on purpose. That is to say, they were created. Given that survival was already a full-time job, why would early Homo sapiens waste valuable time piecing together shells, teeth, bones, and stones? It appears that communication is the solution. There was more to these ornaments than meets the eye. They had a language. A necklace could represent your position within the society, your ancestry, or your readiness to mate. Jewelry was a story that could be worn and told without using words. Additionally, although we now consider jewelry to be a luxury, its first forms came straight from the leftovers of nature. Amber fragments, carved bone, animal teeth, and bird talons. There was no waste. There was potential meaning in everything. It wasn't just a cool appearance to wear a predator's teeth around your neck. I made it through this, it stated. It was a simple pendant that combined spirituality, courage, and protection. It's interesting to note that many of these early beads originated in the sea, indicating that coastal materials were valued even by inland communities. This suggests that early tribes may have engaged in some degree of commerce and exchange. Even in those days, jewelry was a movable kind of culture, a means of transferring relationships and identity between environments. However, there is a spiritual component as well. According to some anthropologists, these items served ceremonial or mystical functions. Teeth were associated with strength, bones with ancestors, and shells with water. They served as talismans, worn near the body to ward off disease, bad luck, or evil spirits. They were more than just ornaments. Essentially, the invention of jewelry signaled a shift in human thinking. It demonstrated an awareness of oneself as well as one's appearance to others. A string with a shell on it became more than just ornamentation. It turned into a declaration about being a part of it, about surviving, about significance. Therefore, contrary to what we originally believed, ancient humans were not primitive. They had already carved their identities into bone and woven their heritage through a hole in a shell as artists, curators, and storytellers. Jewelry developed higher levels of meaning as human civilizations progressed during the Paleolithic era, becoming symbols of lineage, kinship, and life and death. In addition to being worn, adornments were occasionally buried with great ceremony during the Ice Age. The earliest tombs, such as those discovered in Sungir, Russia, which date back more than 30,000 years, demonstrate the importance of jewelry even in those early times. A youngster, possibly no older than 10, was buried in one of these graves wearing a tunic adorned with more than 4,000 ivory beads, each of which was meticulously carved from mammoth tusk and took hours to construct. For a child, the entire procedure probably took thousands of hours. What does that indicate? That jewelry was more than just decoration. It had evolved into a revered ritual, a farewell, and perhaps a vow to the hereafter. These items from the Ice Age weren't created quickly. They demonstrated a very sophisticated aesthetic sense and included symmetry, repetition, and rhythm. Animal-shaped pendants, beaded patterns, and bracelets fashioned from reindeer antler all allude to both technical mastery and spiritual meaning. Jewelry was now a specialized craft that communicated tales of place and identity rather than being made on the fly from scraps. The discovery of Baltic amber far from its birthplace suggests extensive networks of long-distance trade. Even thousands of years later, jet, a black fossilized wood, was used to make mourning jewelry because of its intense shine. Perhaps as a symbolic connection to life force or rebirth, red ochre, a pigment that resembles blood, was employed in some civilizations to dye beads or burial clothes. During this time, jewelry probably also served as a social status symbol. It mattered who you were, where you belonged, and how much work your group was prepared to put into your decor. Someone was being honored and elevated by being buried in ornate decoration. They might have been a shaman, a leader, or just a person who was adored. Naturally, some jewelry may have functioned as coming-of-age markers, clan insignia, or love mementos. However, in the absence of written documentation, these remain speculative estimates that have been pieced together through meticulous examination and excavation sites. But what's left is remarkable. Humans took the time to create and adorn beauty despite the danger, ice, and battles for survival. Even in those days, jewelry was a silent protest against nature's icy disregard, a statement that identity and life were important. Jewelry changed from being a means of tribal expression to becoming a weapon of protection and power as humankind entered the Neolithic and Bronze Ages. Charms, pendants, and amulets were imbued with purpose, magic, and the divine beyond their aesthetic value. According to popular belief, these little items provided protection from illness, bad luck, and curses, bridging the gap between the supernatural and the human. The use of jewelry as an amulet reached unprecedented heights of intricacy in ancient Egypt. The Eye of Horus, Ankhs, and scarabs were more than just beautiful figures, they were spiritual armor. In order to facilitate a safe transition into the afterlife, the scarab, which symbolizes rebirth and metamorphosis, was frequently interred with the deceased. To prevent drowning, children wore amulets fashioned like fish. In order to invoke the gods to protect them even in death, pharaohs were buried wearing gold jewelry fashioned like falcons and cobras. Materials were important. In addition to being valuable, gold was seen as imperishable and connected to the god's body. The vivid cosmic blue of lapis lazuli was believed to provide divine perception. Each of carnelian, faience, and turquoise has significant meaning. Jewelry evolved become a means of encoding cosmic concepts into wearable fashion accessories. Similar beliefs were very popular in Mesopotamia. Protective deities engraved into cylinder seals were worn around the neck or around the body. Sacred symbol-carved beads were thought to ward off illness and demonic influence. Even kings were frequently depicted with bulky jewelry, collars, earrings, and bracelets, not only to flaunt wealth but also for spiritual protection. Amulets were also used by the ancient Greeks as a protective accessory. In the belief that they would give them strength or protect them from danger, soldiers brought carved gemstones with images of gods or mythological animals into combat. Gorgonean, Medusa's head, was a well-liked figure who was worn to frighten evil itself. The privileged were not the only ones who wore these amulets. They were also worn by common people, sometimes made of clay or base metals instead of gold. However, the goal remained the same. Jewelry became a daily conduit to the holy, whether it was worn around the wrist, neck, or incorporated into garments. It functioned as a shield, medication, and a silent prayer. Ancient jewelry has fundamentally evolved into a survival tool, not physically but socially and spiritually. It made it possible for people to take the gods with them, to make something wearable out of dread, and to confront life's uncertainties with grace and a little help from the cosmos. Jewelry changed from a sacred treasure to a visible symbol of hierarchy as civilizations became more hierarchical. No longer merely symbolic or protective, it now shouted, "I have wealth and power, and you don't." Jewelry became political, from Chinese emperors to Mesopotamian queens. Its brilliance is a reflection of aristocratic identity and divine favor. Archaeologists discovered stunning examples of elite decoration in the royal tombs of Ur in Sumer, one of the first centers of civilization. Around 2600 BCE, Queen Puabi was interred under layers of lapis lazuli and gold, necklaces, headdresses, big gold earrings, and a complex cloak beaded with expensive stones. In addition to being a display of wealth, her death was a spiritual proclamation. Her authority was conveyed into the afterlife by her jewelry. This was elevated to even higher levels by the ancient Egyptians. In order to represent divine kingship, pharaohs wore ornate broad collars that were heavily adorned with enamel, turquoise, and gold. Serpents were inlaid into their crowns to represent protection and authority. Elite youngsters were also decked out in rings and amulets. Not all jewelry was worn at formal occasions. It was a language of rank in plain sight, daily diplomacy. Instead of wearing gold, the aristocracy in ancient China wore jade. Jade was more than just pretty. It stood for moral superiority, immortality, and purity. Even the physical characteristics of jade were associated with virtue in Confucian ideas. Slick but robust. Not showy but radiant. In the belief that it would preserve the body and elevate the soul, emperors were buried in jade burial garments stitched together with gold thread. The Mycenaeans, followed by the Greeks and Romans, carried on this tradition throughout the Mediterranean. During public ceremonies and funerals, gold wreaths in the shape of laurel leaves were worn, symbolizing both wealth and cultural sophistication. Signet rings, which served as a status symbol and a security key, were worn by Roman senators and were engraved with their family's crest. Not to be overlooked is the part jewelry plays in court politics. An expensive necklace could be a favor or a ruse to lure someone into risky partnerships. Jewelry was used to signal allegiances, secure marriages, and win over both monarchs and gods. In summary, jewelry was more than just ornamentation or magic by the time writing emerged. It was the infrastructure. It bore the burden of class, dynasty, religion, and law. Wearing it around the throat, draping it across the chest, or flashing it with a slight hand raise, it was the silent language of command. The ancient jeweler, who had fire in their forge and dirt under his nails, stood behind each glittering crown and engraved ring. The methods of decoration evolved together with the complexity of society. Jewelry had evolved beyond hammered metal and strung beads. It developed into alchemy, engineering, and art, frequently centuries before its time. Craftspeople started learning how to use metal-smithing tools in Bronze Age societies. The exact control of heat, materials, and geometry was necessary for techniques like granulation, which fused small gold spheres to surfaces, and filigree, which is delicate wirework. For instance, the Minoans of Crete produced jewelry that appeared practically contemporary, with goddesses with wings spread, lions in mid-roar, and gold-encrusted bees with tiny honey drops dangling. They were more than trinkets. They were small versions of myths. Goldsmiths in Egypt went one step farther. They created intricate collars and amulets that still astonish the modern eye by using open molds for casting and blowpipes to regulate fire. A scarab pectoral bearing Libyan desert glass, a substance created by ancient meteorite impact, was one of the best finds from Tutankhamun's tomb. Here, jewelry served as much than just ornamentation. It was a celestial event. Craftsmen in Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley were improving intaglio carving on seal stones, turning stones into gold, and creating crude drills with string and bow systems. Not only were these engraved items exquisite, they functioned as identification, signatures, and occasionally charms for magic. The use of lost wax casting, an invention that made it possible to create intricate hollow metal structures, was arguably the most noteworthy. This method, which originated in Mesopotamia and Egypt, entailed creating a mold for molten metal by first shaping a figure in wax, then covering it with clay and heating it until the wax melted. The outcome? Lightweight and elaborate pendants, rings and earrings. The jewelry business was fully developed by the time of the Etruscans and Greeks. Engravers, metalworkers, polishers, and gem cutters were employed in specialized workshops. Molds were used to duplicate designs, and new inventions like as hinges, clasps, and even mechanical lockets emerged. These developments went beyond simple luxury. They shared tales of skill, trade, and technology. The emergence of the jeweler allowed for the engineering of human identity in addition to its expression. As a quiet testament to the hands that crafted it and the civilizations that proudly wore it, jewelry evolved into both a craft and a code. Jewelry changed from being a means of expressing oneself or a local custom as ancient trade routes extended over deserts, seas, and empires. It developed into a worldwide commodity, money, and diplomatic tool. Before reaching a queen's neck or a warrior's sword hilt, a single gemstone may go through dozens of hands, nations, and languages. For example, in ancient times, lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone, was valued more highly than gold. It was discovered in Egyptian tombs, Mesopotamian temples, and even Mycenaean Greece, but its only known ancient source was the Badakhshan mines in present-day Afghanistan. This indicates that this stone was being transported by ancient traders over a distance of hundreds of kilometers, through mountain passes, down rivers, and over harsh terrain. Yes, all for beauty, but also for the meaning behind that beauty. Connection, status, and access. Jewelry became a cross-cultural symbol through trade, transforming it from a local product. By sailing from the Levant to North Africa and southern Europe, for example, the Phoenicians served as middlemen, dispersing both foreign commodities and their own exquisite glass beads. Following them, Assyrian motifs infiltrated Mediterranean crafts, and Egyptian lotus designs emerged in Iberia. Pearls from the Persian Gulf, rubies from India, and jade from China were transported over the Silk Road, which occasionally reached Rome. These were messages, not merely materials. In a cemetery in Central Asia, a Chinese jade hairpin symbolized political cooperation. In a Greek marketplace, a Persian turquoise ring symbolized the clash of civilizations and the merging of cultures. Additionally, jewelry used as bribes and tribute. To seal treaties, emperors traded it. To placate invading armies, rulers invested in it. Pearl-studded diadems, belts adorned with gemstones, and gold bracelets used as political chess pieces. Jewelry gained economic weight even among the general public. Jewelry served as a kind of transportable wealth in many ancient communities, particularly for women. Coin bracelets or rings may be included in a bride's dowry, which can be used as emergency funds as well as jewelry. She may sell a necklace to pay off a debt, finance a trip, or escape starvation if necessary. Ancient jewelry was, in essence, the first worldwide brand. It was recognizable everywhere, could be tailored to local preferences, and conveyed the same eternal message. I have a connection to the factors that made this valuable. Part adornment, part passport, part promise. It traveled with us from caravans to caravels. Jewelry eventually assumed one of its most enduring meanings as a sign of love, devotion, and memory, even though it frequently denoted status and divinity. Humans marked romantic and religious bonds with beads, rings, and bangles long before diamond engagement rings became the standard. Rings were given and received as contracts of union, as well as ornamental presents in ancient Egypt. The ring, which was round and had no start or finish, stood for eternity. Rings made of gold, ivory, or braided reeds were exchanged by couples, a custom based on the idea that the third finger of the left hand contained a vein that went straight to the heart, later known as the vena amoris. It was frequently placed on this finger. Annularis pronibus, or betrothal rings, were made of iron in ancient Rome and represented stability and strength. A couple's faces or joined hands, a symbol called as fed, that would endure into medieval Europe and beyond, were etched on some. These rings served as more than just love tokens. They were legally binding and frequently connected to inheritances, dowries, and the legitimacy of children. Other cultures used amulets, necklaces, or bracelets worn in pairs to symbolize romantic ties. Matching talismans made of bone, tooth, or carved wood were traded by lovers in several tribal tribes. These objects were thought to maintain their spiritual connection regardless of how far apart the users traveled. Wedding ceremonies also featured a lot of jewelry. It was customary in India to adorn the bride with elaborate gold jewelry such as hairpieces, anklets, bangles, and nose rings for both aesthetic and religious reasons. Each object represented fertility, prosperity, protection, and symbolism. Similar to a Western wedding ring, the Mangal Sutra, a black beaded necklace that the groom wore during the wedding, came to represent marital status. Love jewelry also sent subliminal messages across cultural boundaries. Romantic poetry, or coded meanings, were etched on posy rings during the European Renaissance. Only the couple could see some of them because they were engraved inside the band. Others contained compartments containing tiny photographs, hair, or fragrances. In this way, jewelry turned into a storehouse of feelings, a small memento of link, memory, and purpose. It was the material manifestation of an intangible connection, trust, and devotion. It said, "You are not forgotten," as it was worn near to the flesh, kissed at times of longing, and handed down from generation to generation. We remain connected. Additionally, vows were proudly worn and carved on metal long before they were recorded in writing. In ancient times, jewelry served as a means of connecting the body to the divine in addition to serving as decoration, invoking blessings, warding off evil, and designating sacred functions. Ornaments were frequently imbued with spiritual significance and utilized for purposes beyond mere beauty or wealth. Seldom was a necklace simply a necklace. It was a silent dialogue with the gods, a barrier and a prayer. During ceremonies, priests and priestesses in ancient Mesopotamia donned intricately patterned headdresses and pectorals. These were spiritual costumes designed to resemble mythological animals or celestial forms, not accessories. One bead may stand in for a planet. A clasp could represent the weapon of a god. Cosmic order was tangibly embodied through jewelry. Egypt went one step farther. Items made to channel the god's power were worn by high priests. For instance, the Menet necklace was thought to bring fertility and divine favor, in addition to being purely ornamental. It was frequently shaken like a rattle during rites to appease the goddess and was worn by Hathor priestesses. Numerous Egyptian paintings feature the well-known Usek collar, which was a solar emblem whose curve mirrored the sun deity Ra's journey across the sky. In ancient India, jewelry was essential to both Buddhist and Hindu customs. It was believed that anklets, bangles, and earrings would balance the chakras and enhance spiritual well-being by stimulating energy points on the body. Often used for gods and religious ceremonies, gold was thought to be pure and eternal. Intricate gold jewelry was used to embellish god statues, reflecting the idea that the holy required and deserved material wealth. The Aztecs and Maya considered jade to be a sacred stone far more valuable than gold in the Americas. It represented breath, life force, and divine energy. To transport their souls into the afterlife, monarchs were buried with jade in their mouths, while priests wore pendants made of the stone in the likeness of gods. Amulets and medallions bearing crosses or images of saints were worn even in the early days of Christianity to keep against temptation, the disease, and devils. Here, jewelry served a defensive as well as religious purpose. Ancient spiritual jewelry appealed to a universal human desire to look beyond ourselves for protection, favor, and purpose, whether it was worn by a high priest or a poor farmer. A holy thread, a sacred shimmer, a means of carrying the skies around your neck, rather than in the sky. Their jewelry survived the rise and fall of ancient civilizations, whether it was handed down through the years, buried in graves, or concealed in ruins. What began as a string of beads became into something far more potent, a symbol of identity, a storehouse of memories, and occasionally the only hint that remains. From Scandinavia to Nubia, jewelry provides personal images of the deceased at grave sites. A brooch could indicate a person's cultural background. A ring could be interpreted as a sign of marriage. A necklace composed of a variety of materials could allude to migration or long-distance trading. People's perceptions of themselves and their desires to be remembered can be inferred from the manner they wore jewelry, whether it was layered across the chest, threaded through their hair, or concealed beneath clothing. Also keep in mind that these things were designed to survive longer than their wearers. As heirlooms, they served as symbols of continuity during periods of transition. On a wedding day, a daughter may wear her mother's pendant. The ring of a warrior may be interred with his son. Jewelry, which is frequently more enduring than tales and more intimate than monuments, evolved into a link between the past and present. Jewelry served as a way to maintain identification during periods of distress or exile. People only took what they could carry during forced migrations or the fall of cities, and jewelry served as both a financial and emotional safety net. Perhaps a modest bangle will have greater significance than a whole house abandoned. The materials themselves grew old with grace. Gold is impervious to corrosion. Gems are not decomposed. Therefore, jewelry might endure for millennia, unlike fabrics or food offerings. In doing so, it retained human fingerprints both literally and figuratively. Every scratch, clasp, and lost stone almost evokes the pride, love, ritual, and suffering. We still follow these inclinations from long ago. Wedding bands are passed down to us. We wear initial necklaces. Lockets are placed close to our hearts. We store jewelry in boxes because of the memories they bring back, not because of its commercial value. Therefore, when we examine the history of ancient jewelry, we are not merely researching metallurgy or fashion. We are researching human desire. The desire to be noticed, to be safe, to fit in, and eventually to be remembered. Cast in bronze, wrapped in gold, and strung in shell. The history of jewelry is our history, long-lasting, individual, eternal. Nobody anticipates what lies beneath the serene wheat fields and languid roads of northern France. A huge subterranean metropolis etched straight onto the chalk. One of the most peculiar archaeological puzzles in Europe is located close to the Somme River, just outside the village of Naurs. A vast underground maze with more than 300 rooms that is more than 3 kilometers long. Only a 33-meter descent will take you out of rural Picardy. You are in a stone-carved ghost city. It's simple to overlook. Only a tiny entrance on a forested slope is visible from the outside. However, the cool air welcomes you like a secret once you enter. The passages get broader, they contort. They lead to secret rooms, kitchens, stables, and even a chapel. Long, low-ceilinged passageways connect several of the rooms. Others are solitary dead ends that might be used for storage or something more covert. It seems more like someone transformed the underworld into a village than a cave. The magnitude isn't the most unnerving aspect. Its beginnings are in silence. No definitive documentation tells us why or when the No Wars complex was first erected. Construction is thought to have started in the Middle Ages, most likely between the 9th and 13th centuries. But was it meant as a shelter, a monastic retreat, or something else entirely? The walls are silent. According to one widely accepted explanation, the tunnels were first dug by local monks or people as a means of evading Viking attacks or subsequent invasions during the 100 Years' War. It would have been logical. Because of the network's ingenious ventilation and the soft, easily excavated chalk, fires could be started without choking residents. It was the ideal hiding place because it was almost undetectable from above. The city beneath No Wars changed throughout time. They dug wells. Above ground, smoke chimneys were concealed inside tree trunks. Even in the depths, out of enemy sight, horses were stabled. Nevertheless, in spite of its brilliant engineering, the site was forgotten until the 19th century, when a priest and amateur archaeologist unearthed it. And that's only the start. Because what began as a possible medieval haven would eventually turn into a haven, a source of fascination, and a battlefield for warriors engaged in one of the bloodiest conflicts in history. One thing, though, is evident down here, amid the carved walls and unclear purpose. Fear was not the foundation of No Wars. It was made to last. It's like entering the blueprint of an unseen civilization when you walk through No Wars. The walls, which feel chilly and chalky to the touch, are the result of centuries of meticulous sculpting, one pickaxe stroke at a time. There are no indications of hurried excavation or mechanical remnants. Rather, you discover layers of human labor, accuracy and purpose, generations creating their own underground haven. At least in comparison to tougher rock, the area's soft chalk, or cray, made digging comparatively simple. However, excavation was not the true problem. Engineering was involved. How can an underground community be established without it collapsing? Without anyone above noticing, how can a multi-level network be ventilated? The No Wars people worked things out. There is an eerie logic to the arrangement of the rooms. There are communal halls that imply some sort of structured, even organized society beneath the surface, storage rooms where food could be kept cold for months, and residential areas that are small enough to be warmed by a fire or body heat. The fact that entire areas were set aside for animals, particularly horses, suggests that whoever utilized No Wars meant to spend weeks or more below, rather than just days. The ventilation shafts are the most noticeable, hiding among the branches and foliage above. Dozens of them slither from the depths to the surface. To keep from being discovered by strangers, some were covered with vegetation or trash. People were able to breathe, cook, and live in secret thanks to the airflow they created. Fire smoke would disappear under the tree canopy and drift away unnoticed. The site may have taken centuries to create, gradually expanding room by room as needed, according to the evidence. Neither quick construction nor forced labor are evident. It seems to be a collective endeavor that has likely been preserved and enhanced over many generations. This was neither a castle constructed by order nor a military fort. It was a place created out of necessity, collaboration, and stealthy ingenuity. Although it is not opulent, the craftsmanship is effective. Walls are smoothed and not collapsing, Doors are rounded and ceilings are strengthened. Even in the absence of decoration, the geometry, the repetition, and the sheer effort required to make this place a reality are beautiful. Maybe that's why Nao has survived. It was more than a simple chalk carving. It stemmed from a deep-seated human instinct to safeguard, maintain, and be ready for anything. Although there are no official documents that identify the initial builders of Naos, historical rumors point to a probable group of early occupants, monks. Invasion was common in northern France during the Middle Ages, initially from the Vikings and subsequently in subsequent wars such as the 100 Years' War. Many decided to erect sanctuaries beneath their chapels, and monastic communities frequently found themselves on the front lines of unrest. With its remote setting and huge underground area, Naos almost perfectly matches that pattern. The layout itself has clues that lend credence to this notion. In the middle of the hundreds of rooms lies a chapel, carved with an arched roof and a basic altar. Despite its simplicity, it has spiritual weight, with space for a small assembly and even faint etchings around the walls that might have been verses or symbols lost to time. The area was obviously intended for congregational worship. This was neither a defensive bunker nor a storage. In every way, it was a haven. Although the carving process may have begun with the monks, others also sought refuge here. Local peasants and villages sought safety in Naos as the centuries went by and conflicts raged throughout the area. During sieges or enemy attacks, entire families are believed to have concealed below, particularly when foreign armies or mercenary bands came through Picardy. Up to 3,000 people might live in the underground metropolis simultaneously, according to local oral tradition. Not only is it a haven, but it is also a secret population center that operates in complete secrecy under enemy occupation. Envision the dim hallways resonating with faint murmurs, the scent of smoke, the gentle clatter of pots and implements, and the sporadic cries of a kid, all taking place below the surface as peril lurked overhead. However, Naos provided more than just refuge, even in the face of the fear that probably drove others underground. It provided honor. Unlike animals, people were not crowded into caves. They had halls, rooms, and areas for waiting, praying, and breathing. There were regulations, structure, and most likely a hierarchy. Which room went to whom? Who was watching the shafts? Who set food rations? The design implies social organization rather than chaos, yet the solutions are lost. In many respects, Naos was a parallel society rather than merely a place to hide. Silent, hidden, and completely independent. Constructed out of necessity rather than luxury. And in doing so, it preserved communities without the upper class even being aware of their existence. The subterranean city of Naur silently fulfilled its function for ages, protecting monks, villagers, and maybe entire generations from raids and conflicts. Then it disappeared from memory as mysteriously as it had been carved. Few people in the neighborhood were even aware of its existence by the 18th century. The city below had been engulfed by time rather than earth, the entrance had been overgrown, and the stories had faded. What causes a city to vanish? Bit by bit, slowly. The demand for underground shelter decreased as northern France experienced peace. People went back to their fields and farms. Families established stronger underground roots. With every generation, oral histories become less extensive. Eventually, nobody recalled to inform the following youngster that there was a whole chalk civilization beneath their feet. Its usage throughout the Napoleonic Wars and the French Revolution are unrecorded. The tunnels were hardly mentioned during the 19th century. It developed into a children's fairy tale, a local legend, and a warning about secret passageways and spectral monks. Until curiosity rediscovered it one day in the 1880s. Archaeology was a hobby of a Catholic priest named Father Ernest Danicourt. The murmurs had reached him There was a hollow sound underfoot, according to a shepherd child. The locals believed him to be insane. Danicourt pressed on, though. He started removing brush and rubbish from an odd indentation in the ground. Even the skeptics were taken aback by what he discovered. He discovered hundreds of rooms, each more ornate than the last. Down in the dark with just rope and lamps, he was the first human to stroll those halls in maybe 150 years. He started categorizing the site after cleaning and mapping them. He eventually made it available to the general public as a curiosity. Inquiring as to how anything so enormous could be concealed in plain sight, visitors came to see the city beneath the soil. Even Danicourt, however, was never really sure of its beginnings. Medieval chronologies were conjectural. Some rooms' functions were still unknown. Why were certain sections blocked off? The narrower, deeper tunnels were carved by whom? Questions arose from the chalky walls as he discovered more. Only as a mystery had Naurs returned. The stage was eerily deserted with no actors remaining. A city recalled via shadows, solitude, and rooms that had waited for someone to return, not through papers. The tranquil plains of Picardy were ripped apart by a new form of evil, the First World War, just a few decades after Father Danicourt rediscovered Naurs. Northern France became a bloody maze of mud, barbed wire and artillery craters as a result of trench warfare. And something remarkable occurred below while the war raged above. Once more, Naurs was a secret haven. During the Somme offensive, one of the bloodiest operations of the war, soldiers from France, Britain, Australia, and even Canada traversed the area. Many of them ended up close to the village of Naurs, and others were brought underground, possibly for curiosity, maybe for safety, or maybe just for a little peace and quiet from the noise above. However, they made an impression rather than only stopping by. More than 2,000 inscriptions that were meticulously carved by soldiers can be found on the soft chalk walls of Naurs. Dates, regiments, names, ranks, and even hometowns. It turned into a human time capsule carved into stone, a sort of underground visitor book. There are intricate signatures that include military symbols. Others are painfully straightforward. It was written by men who knew they might never come home. And it wasn't graffiti. Numerous members of the Australian Imperial Force were among these warriors. They have some of the most graffiti. According to historians, soldiers may have been brought to Naurs for short rests or as part of local reconnaissance. The location might have brought back memories of their native land, such as the Jenolan Caves in New South Wales. Or perhaps it was simply the awe of entering an old stone city after escaping trench misery. A few days prior to the start of the Battle of the Somme in July 1916, some carved dates. Many of those named never returned to Canada, England, or Australia. However their writing did, the dim hallways still reverberate with their presence. Echoes, not ghosts. These inscriptions have been utilized in recent years by scholars to track down family histories and even reunite descendants with war-lost troops. Once a forgotten haven, Naurs is now a living monument. Through handwriting etched into stone by men facing the abyss, rather than monuments or parades. Their words still whisper down here in the solitude. I was present. I was important. Remember me. Not only is Naurs large and mysterious, but its graffiti is what makes it so eerie. World War I soldiers, young men caught up in a conflict that had wiped out all semblance of routine, carved thousands of inscriptions into the chalk walls, not by refugees or medieval monks. These weren't thoughtless doodling or haphazard sketches. They were very human, methodical, and cautious. A name etched in stone turns into a voice that will not go away. The majority of the more than 2,000 such inscriptions that have been catalogued thus far include names, ranks, unit numbers, and dates. Some are accurate, March 1916 Penrich Kelly, 3rd Battalion, AIF. Some are more evasive, only initials, a year, and perhaps a single word such as peace or home. The walls made of chalk turned into a memory canvas. They were as meticulous about each letter as they were about their firearms. Numerous troops had their names engraved in groups, frequently side by side, of troops from the same unit. Australian troops from the 1st and 2nd Divisions chiselled whole walls in one area of the tunnels, transforming them into unofficial regimental memorials. Ego was not the issue. It had to do with being remembered. Leaving a mark, a silent act of resistance against the forgetfulness of death, was a reassuring thing in the chaos of war. Others went farther. Their hometowns, Manchester, Sydney, and Perth, were carved. They etched military symbols, crosses, or kangaroos into the walls. Some even engraved brief messages. One soldier only carved "still alive," while another penned "Goodbye France." Then there are the times, many in 1916, when tens of thousands would be murdered in a matter of hours during the Battle of the Somme, which was just weeks or even days away. Now feels like a moment of suspended time, a breath before the storm, because of the uncanny proximity of these serene carvings to the carnage above. Military historians and genealogists are now interested in these inscriptions. Families are reconnecting with names that have been lost to time. Knowing that their grandfather or great-uncle stood here, smiled here, and perhaps sobbed here before ascending back into the cacophony of battle, some descendants now trace the same letters with their fingertips as they traverse the same tunnels. Naur is more than just an archaeological site these days. It is a live document that has been engraved on stone rather than paper, a location where historical voices continue to reverberate, refusing to be ignored. Naur was silent again after the Great War. The underground metropolis reverted to its peaceful, chalky blackness after the soldiers left, many of them permanently. Layers of moisture, soot, and dust caused the names they etched to vanish. Though mostly forgotten by history, the once active tunnels are now a curiosity and are occasionally visited. It appears that peace has a way of burying things as well. The underground structure received intermittent attention in the decades that followed. In the 1950s and 1960s, tourism brochures promoted Naur as a charming medieval oddity, La Cité Souterraine. Although few people really understood what they were walking through, it was reopened to the public during the interwar years and again following World War II. The majority of guests passed by the names of thousands of troops who were silently inscribed on the walls behind them as they strolled through the dim hallways. Even worse, the location started to experience casual damage and neglect. The delicate chalk was burnt by lighting installations. Sometimes century-old writings were placed directly next to contemporary markings and graffiti. Parts of the building were gradually corroded by dust, mold, and vibration from tourists. Meanwhile, superficial narratives and tourist shop interpretations continued to obscure the actual historical significance of what was inside. Though no one was actually searching, the inscriptions were there, concealed in plain sight. Naur would not regain its voice until 2014, nearly a century after World War I. During a routine investigation of the site, a team led by French archaeologist Gilles Prilot discovered the magnitude of the army graffiti. He discovered more than a few straggling names. It was a hand-carved, enormous, unrecorded battle archive. He came to see that Naur was more than just a tourist attraction or a medieval haven. It was a spiritual appendix to the actual war, a time capsule. Interest in Naur was rekindled by this discovery. Digital scans were created, conservation work started, and the graffiti was catalogued for future study. The signatures of ancestors who never came back were seen by families from as far afield as Australia and Canada. the stillness of those decades that were lost still persists. The most moving messages in Nos were concealed for almost a century, by carelessness, not by secrecy. The fact that we neglected to search for them, more than the fact that the soldiers etched their names into the stone, may be the greater tragedy. Everything changed when Nas wartime graffiti was rediscovered in 2014. All of a sudden, what had been promoted as a quirky underground attraction was acknowledged for what it was. Men getting ready to die engraved a hallowed record of lives cut short onto the ground. Nas changed overnight from a tourist destination to a historically significant location on a global scale. Archaeologist Jill Prilot spearheaded the rediscovery, starting with a straightforward preservation investigation. However, he and his group discovered they were doing more than simply collecting medieval buildings as they descended more into the tunnels. They stood amid an archive of World War I, written into the walls themselves rather than on paper. Between 1916 and 1917, the team discovered more than 2,000 names painstakingly carved into chalk, many of which came from the Australian Imperial Force. It was the greatest concentration of First World War inscriptions ever discovered underground, according to Prilot. There were more than a few soldiers going through. Men were leaving their last thoughts in stone and seeking refuge from the war above in a constant stream. There was a global reaction to the discovery. Researchers identified people, units, and fates by comparing the names with military records. We reached out to families in Canada, the UK, and Australia. Some discovered for the first time that No Wars was where their grandfathers or great-uncles had travelled. Others learned that names were written in chalk half a world away on telegrams and medals. In the meantime, the site's preservation and restoration work picked up speed. 3D imaging was used to scan parts of the underground city. Interpretive displays were upgraded to reflect the site's new significance, and lighting was increased to preserve the chalk walls. To stop more erosion, parts of the inscriptions were closed off to tourists. What surfaced was a tale of reunion as much as archaeology. People travelled to No Wars to experience history rather than to be in awe of the stone walls, to use their fingertips to trace a carved name and briefly sense a long-dead soldier's heartbeat. Listening to what the deceased left behind was just as important as paying respect to them. No Wars was no longer a forgotten footnote as a result of their initiatives. It turned into the message in the dark that has always been there, patiently waiting for the world to remember. No Wars' underground city is more than just a reminder of the war or a feat of medieval engineering. It is a representation of human ingenuity, tenacity, and the peculiar closeness between silence and survival. Instead of serving as a memorial to a single event, it is a multi-layered palimpsest of human history, with each corridor reflecting the anxieties, aspirations, and decisions of a distinct epoch. What started out as a potential monastic retreat became a whole underground sanctuary, a forgotten wonder, and ultimately an unintentional war memorial etched by its own witnesses. No Wars resists categorization in this way. It is more than just a historical location. It is a psychological space that has held habit, prayer, terror, and rest for generations. The breath of monks, villagers, and warriors has been absorbed by the chilly chalk walls. Each has left their mark. Particularly for the descendants of the World War I soldiers who etched their names there, No Wars has evolved into a site of contemplation in the present day. Today, going through the tunnels is like accessing a shared experience that was once buried but is now alive again, rather than a battlefield or museum. You walk through testimony in addition to stone. It has also developed into a location for international cooperation. Historians from France and Australia now collaborate to compare military documents with inscriptions. In order to teach history in the most visceral way possible, school children are taken down the tunnels to see what someone else carved with their own hands when they weren't sure they would make it through the week. What No Wars tells us about legacy is arguably the most potent. It was constructed out of necessity rather than with a view to glory. Nevertheless, it persisted, and eventually its quiet tenacity turned into its strength. It serves as a reminder that history is not merely recounted in speeches and statues, rather it is muttered into chalk, concealed in shadowy nooks and patiently awaiting remembrance. No Wars endures despite not being loud or shouting, and in doing so it speaks to the universal human desire to leave a mark that simply states, "We were here," and to give meaning to the places we are most afraid of. We were important,